At the very highest level of professional sports, success is usually a shield. It covers the cracks in a team's structure, hides personal friction, and convinces everyone involved that as long as trophies are being lifted, the foundation remains solid. At just 22 years old, Carlos Alcaraz completed a season that most legends spend an entire career chasing. He won 2 Grand Slams, claimed 8 titles overall, compiled a terrifying 71-9 match record, and ended the year sitting firmly on top of the world as the ATP's #1 player. From the outside, it was a picture of complete sporting perfection. Then came the announcement that sent shockwaves through international tennis. Just days after his coaching team was officially recognized as the best on tour, Alcaraz announced that he was parting ways with Juan Carlos Ferrero, the man who took him in as a raw 15-year-old kid from El Palmar and transformed him into a multi-slam champion. The public messages were polite, dignified, and carefully written. They spoke of gratitude, childhood dreams fulfilled, and an extraordinary chapter coming to its natural close. "We reached the top," Alcaraz wrote, "and if our paths had to diverge, it should be from up there." It sounded like a clean, mutual decision made by 2 men at peace with their shared history. Except, it wasn't. Within hours of the announcement, the carefully constructed narrative began to fracture. Ferrero stepped forward in Spanish media and made an admission that contradicted the official statement. "I wish I could have continued," he said. "I put my soul into this project. I'm hurt." That single line destroyed the illusion of a peaceful parting. It revealed that the split wasn't a shared choice to walk away at the summit. It was a dismissal. Why would the undisputed world #1 cut ties with the mentor who built him, precisely at the moment they were dominating global tennis? What changed behind closed doors, in a relationship that had survived grueling injuries, unbearable media pressure, and the immense burden of carrying modern tennis after the Big Three? To understand why this circle shattered, you have to look past the official press releases and examine the hidden tension that had been quietly building inside Team Alcaraz for months. Was this the ultimate act of maturity from a young champion finally asserting total authority over his own life? Or was it the first step in a dangerous gamble engineered by the people surrounding him? To understand why this separation sent such a shockwave through professional tennis, you have to realize that Juan Carlos Ferrero was never just an employee in the Alcaraz camp. He was the architect. When Ferrero took charge of a 15-year-old Alcaraz in 2018, he was a former world #1 and French Open champion who could have coached any established star on the ATP Tour. Instead, he chose a skinny kid from Vienna with raw, chaotic talent and a dangerously wild forehand. Ferrero didn't just teach Alcaraz how to construct a point or hit a slide on clay. He built an entire ecosystem around him. He instilled rigid, old-school discipline into a teenager who naturally preferred flair over structure. Ferrero acted as a shield, keeping the aggressive Spanish media at bay while molding Carlos into the youngest world #1 in ATP history. They weren't just coach and player. Ferrero was a father figure, an elder brother, and the moral compass of the entire operation. Under Ferrero's watchful eye, Alcaraz captured multiple Grand Slam titles, spent dozens of weeks at #1, and developed a game so terrifyingly complete that legends of the sport called him a hybrid of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. When they won together, Ferrero was the first person Alcaraz ran to in the player's box. When Alcaraz suffered agonizing on-court cramps or sudden physical collapses, Ferrero was the voice in the press conference, reminding the world that Carlos was still just a boy, learning how to carry the weight of an entire sport. In modern tennis, player-coach relationships are notoriously fragile. Players hire and fire coaches like seasonal contractors, but Team Alcaraz was supposed to be the exception, a family-built fortress immune to the typical ego clashes that destroy elite sports teams. So what broke the fortress? The first subtle cracks didn't appear during a period of failure. They appeared right in the middle of their greatest triumphs. Because as Carlos grew from a wide-eyed teenager into a global icon with millions in endorsements, the fundamental dynamic between student and master began to shift. Ferrero's uncompromising demand for total discipline began to clash with a young megastar who wanted more autonomy over his own life, his schedule, and his career decisions. And as the money, influence, and stakes grew exponentially, Ferrero wasn't the only powerful voice sitting in the player box anymore. In the high-stakes world of elite tennis, the relationship between a superstar and their coach exists inside a delicate paradox. The player is technically the employer, signing the checks and funding the operation. Yet, to achieve greatness, that same player must submit completely to the coach's authority, discipline, and vision. For 7 years, Carlos Alcaraz willingly handed that authority to Juan Carlos Ferrero. But behind the scenes, a quiet power struggle was brewing, one that pitted Ferrero's rigid, single-minded focus against the expanding ambitions of Carlos's family and management. At the center of this shifting dynamic was Carlos Alcaraz Sr., the player's father and longtime guardian of his commercial and personal affairs. As Carlitos transitioned from a teenage prodigy into a global cultural icon, decisions were no longer just about forehands, backhands, and recovery sessions. They were about high-value exhibition matches, lucrative global endorsement deals, and managing a brutal calendar that demanded non-stop travel. Ferrero, an old-school purist who lived and breathed the strict environment of his Villena Academy, saw these commercial distractions as direct threats to Carlos's longevity. He wanted absolute control over the training blocks, the scheduling, and the discipline. Reports inside Spanish media began to leak a growing tension. Ferrero believed the player's circle was pushing him too hard off the court, while the inner circle felt Ferrero's control had become overly restrictive for a mature 22-year-old world number one. The breaking point arrived during contract negotiations ahead of the upcoming season. It wasn't merely a dispute over numbers, it was a battle over philosophy, authority, and the future direction of the team. Ferrero wanted the autonomy to run the program as he always had. The Alcaraz camp wanted to restructure the dynamic, delegating more daily coaching duties to secondary coach Samuel Lopez and giving Carlos greater freedom over his own career. When negotiations stalled, the decision was made. The Alcaraz family chose to cut the cord. That single choice ended one of the most dominant partnerships in modern sports history and threw Team Alcaraz into completely uncharted territory. The immediate aftermath of the split laid bare the deep tactical and emotional rift that had been forming behind the scenes. When the news broke, top-tier coaches from across the globe rushed to offer their services. Over 5 world-class coaches reportedly reached out to Team Alcaraz, eager to take the reins of the world's most talented player. Instead of hiring another high-profile legend, Alcaraz made a move that surprised the tennis establishment. He promoted Samuel Lopez, the secondary coach who had frequently stepped in during Ferrero's absences, to lead the box full-time for the 2026 season. On paper, keeping Lopez offered continuity, but in reality, it was a declaration of independence. Lopez was well-liked and tactical, but he was not a former Grand Slam champion or a commanding authority figure like Ferrero. Under Lopez, Carlos wasn't looking for a master to follow. He was looking for a partner to execute his own vision. The new arrangement yielded immediate, electrifying results. At the 2026 Australian Open, playing with total tactical freedom and an unburdened spirit, Alcaraz tore through the draw. He captured his first Melbourne title, winning his 7th Grand Slam overall, and officially becoming the youngest player in the history of the sport to complete the career Grand Slam. For a brief moment, the critics were silenced. It appeared that Alcaraz had proven the doubters wrong, demonstrating that he no longer needed Ferrero's iron fist to dominate the global stage. He's evolved, commentators proclaimed. He doesn't need a strict handler anymore. Of course, there is always another way to read early success. Winning can hide structural flaws for a surprisingly long time, until the pressure reaches a boiling point. Because Ferrero wasn't just a tactical coach, he was the enforcer who managed Carlos's workload, forced him to respect physical limits, and repeatedly stopped him from pushing his body past the point of collapse. Ferrero was the one person in the player box willing to say no to a hyper-aggressive prodigy who wanted to play every point like a highlight reel. Without that firm hand on the reins, the true test wasn't whether Carlos could win when feeling unstoppable. The true test was what would happen when the inevitable crisis arrived. That crisis arrived far sooner than anyone expected. By mid-April, during the European clay season, the physical demands of Alcaraz's violent, high-tempo game finally caught up to him. After a grueling loss to his chief rival Jannik Sinner at the Monte Carlo Masters, Alcaraz suffered a severe right wrist injury. The injury forced him to withdraw from Barcelona and ultimately cost him the entire clay and grass seasons, missing both Roland Garros and Wimbledon. The silence in the Alcaraz box during those long months was deafening. For 7 years, Ferrero had been the master strategist who carefully governed Carlos's scheduling, forced mandatory rest blocks, and pulled him back when he wanted to rush back from injuries. Without Ferrero's unyielding authority to act as a handbrake, the modern Alcaraz camp appeared increasingly driven by impatience. As the US Open approached, reports surfaced that Alcaraz was rushing his recovery to defend his title in New York. Critics and former pros, including Greg Rusedski, voiced deep concern, pointing out that under Ferrero's watch, a premature return would never have been allowed. "I don't think Ferrero would have permitted him to take this sort of risk," Rusedski noted, capturing the exact structural vulnerability of the new setup. This is the hidden cost of dismissing an elite mentor. When a young superstar takes full ownership of his decision-making, he also inherits total responsibility for the physical consequences. The counterargument, of course, is that growth requires discomfort. Alcaraz could not remain under the protective wing of a parental figure forever. By stepping out on his own, winning the Australian Open, and navigating this grueling rehabilitation, Carlos is undergoing the necessary and painful rite of passage every true sporting titan must eventually face. Yet, as he prepares to step back onto the court under the blistering lights of Arthur Ashe Stadium, the question remains: did cutting ties with Juan Carlos Ferrero grant him his ultimate freedom, or did it dismantle the only safety net protecting his body from long-term destruction? So maybe the real story was never that Carlos Alcaraz simply outgrew Juan Carlos Ferrero, or that his team made a short-sighted commercial mistake. The real story is about the terrifying, necessary price of independence. For 7 years, Ferrero gave Alcaraz structure, safety, and a championship framework that made him an absolute phenom. But to become an enduring legend, a player who doesn't just dominate an era, but survives it, Alcaraz had to step out from behind his mentor's shadow and answer the hardest questions of his career on his own. He proved he could reach the highest mountain in tennis by completing the career Grand Slam without Ferrero in his corner. But he also learned the brutal reality of what happens when the safety net is gone and the physical toll of his own genius catches up to him. The split shattered the inner circle that made him. Now, the burden of rebuilding it rests entirely on his shoulders. Did Alcaraz make a brave, necessary leap into mature stardom? Or did he dismantle the one relationship that kept his career from burning out too soon? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was this a vital step in his growth, or a dangerous gamble he'll regret? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the decisions shaping tennis's biggest superstars, hit the like button and subscribe for more investigative commentary.